Greetings and welcome back to Ken McAuliffe Jazz Vinyl Audiophile, where we will get to the truth about every piece of vinyl I have in my sweaty mitts in my grubby apartment, which are thousands and thousands of records. One of my good friends on our Jazz Vinyl Lovers group, Mike Parenti, was very interested in the comparisons of the first pressings of Miles Davis Working with the Miles Davis Quintet, which that is a first pressing, still in shrink wrap, and the first pressing of Steamin with the Miles Davis Quintet, also a first pressing. Still got the price sticker on there, $45 from Jazz Record Center. These were reissued in sometime in the 1970s as this twofer. Miles Davis Workin and Steamin bitches. And I think these are Nat Hentop's original liner notes. So I did a comparison on this comp and then also on another comp, which I'll show you in a minute, which compiles Cookin' and Relaxin'. His 4 prestige dates, which the great quintet of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Philly Joe Jones, Paul Chambers, and Red Garland knocked off in about a week, I believe. I think it was 3 sessions over the course of a couple weeks, I think that's correct, to get out of their Prestige Records contract and then go to Columbia, where the sound immediately changed. He went from Rudy Van Gelder's intimate studio to Columbia 30th Street Studios, which was a giant church. And I feel, in general, I much prefer the Rudy Van Gelder recording sound to the Stan Plonkin, is that his name? Engineer at Columbia. The sound on the Columbia records, on the early Miles Davis Columbia records, such as Miles Ahead, or Milestones, or Sketches of Spain, is really big. You're really hearing the hall. But I sometimes feel like Miles' smaller groups, such as his later 60s quintet with Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams, they don't get lost, but they're not as immediate sounding. I also have the Mo-Fi reissues of the Miles Davis 60s Quintet. I'm getting off the bass. I used to think those were much better. Now I just think they're better. But there's something magical about the 60s Quintet recorded in 30th Street, but there's also a little bit of a lost sound. But in saying that, let's talk about this one first. Miles Davis Workin' and Steamin'. Some notes here on the inside of this puppy. This was remastered in 1974. So you're talking maybe 14 years after the original fact. My copy is both of these I have are promo pressings. White label promos. I paid $15 for this comp. It's in excellent condition. And generally with promos, those are some of the first records to be pressed in a run of records, so they can send the early copies out to the press to get, write-ups and stuff. And often back in the day, initially they'd have different label colors, but then as time went on in the 70s, you just see a stamp on the back, or even with some Blue Notes, you'll see a promo copy or DJ copy stamp on it. Original recording supervised by Bob Weinstock. Original recording engineer Rudy Van Gelder. Recorded at Van Gelder Studios, Hackensack. Now this is interesting. I didn't realize that. It's at Hackensack, 1956. I just assumed that these Miles records were recorded at Englewood Cliffs, but they were recorded at Hackensack. Hackensack is basically a living room. It's a much smaller studio. It's barely a studio, and it was an addition onto Rudy Van Gelder's parents' house in Hackensack. And you can see some old pictures. You see Horace Silver playing, you see the curtains behind him, you'll see blinds in some shots with Sonny Rollins, or you see curtains with the kind of 50s op art on them, which really stamps it. But they're, the sound in a living room is so intimate. And to me, those Hackensack recordings are really intimate of all of Rudy Van Gelder's stuff, and you can sort of pick them out, all the earlier stuff. So I did not know that. But anyway, what did I find? In each instance, I played a track from the original pressing first, then played the same track on the comp. So first up, I actually did this backwards as of what I told you. I started with Miles Davis Relaxin'. That's an original pressing. This is a yellow Fireworks label, Washington Avenue Bergenfeld. This might be there might be a pressing before this, but this is a deep groove pressing. It's in good shape. So I played Relaxin' first. I just played the first one that came up, I guess. I think I played Oleo. And my notes for Oleo. The original pressing, clear, wonderful imaging, so deep bass. Trumpet is very high, clean, and smooth. Piano is boxy. Hello, Rudy Van Gelder. The bass is very raw, deep, powerful. The drums are behind the front line and a little bit light. Good cymbal air, good ping definition. You know, a cymbal has so much that you can judge when you're listening to hi-fi. You have the sound of the stick on the cymbal, what we call the ping sound. You have the bell sound that they play it. And then you also have the ambiance of the cymbal. You know, the sound around the cymbal as it radiates waves of sound out from it. And Rudy was very good at capturing that in these recordings and the original Good Air. All of these pressings are mono. It's interesting, the difference that I find pretty much was the same on the early original pressing compared to the 1974 reissues was the older pressings, the mono spot is bigger. If you have mono, it's not like it's just a little tiny spot and everything is crunched in there. Mono is very magical because if somebody has created a large mono spot, which this copy of Relaxin is, you actually get a big spread of sound. You definitely get sound in the back. You get the full dimension of the studio if you have a good hi-fi system. And my hi-fi system that I judged these on was my Kuzma Stabiar with the EMT cartridge, a Sugden LA4 preamp, which I just got, which I really love, the LKV Research Veros Class D amplifier, and I'm reviewing these OMA Oswald's Mill Audio Fleetwood DeVille speakers, and they are just a game changer. I'm really excited about the review I'm going to be doing for Stereophile with these speakers, which are very much, I had Jonathan Weiss over here last week and his designer of Vitas, and they both agreed it was sort of like a studio monitor sound, and they didn't know these speakers could work so well in a small room, but they do. Okay, so on to Relaxin on the comp. I was actually quite knocked out on how good this 1974 compilation sounds. It sounds much better than I would have expected. And oddly enough, the drums, which really knocked me out on Relaxin on Oleo, the drums were much more up front on the comp than they were on the original pressing. Even taking into effect or consideration groove wear, which there isn't much on my original copy of Relaxin, I don't know why that would be. That just kind of knocked me out. The drums were louder and more up front, and there was a similar depth in general, so it's not like everything was up front as a Tone Poet or Music Matters pressing might sound, and I lost all that depth. That depth was all still there on the mono compilation of Relaxin. There were just more drums there. I was kind of surprised. The top end was cleaner and clearer on the comp. I think that's basically because it's brand new. The edges aren't on the images within the music. The edges of each image weren't as well defined as with the first pressing. The first pressing is just very, very lifelike, very immediate, and you really hear the space. You hear the musicians in space. That spot was a little bit smaller on the compilation. Even though the spatial cues were basically the same, there was a little less spread. As I said, it's a smaller mono spot, and Coltrane's tenor sounded a little drier. But overall, I was really kind of floored because I paid $15 for this comp, and I paid between $50 and $100 for my various pressings of Miles' recordings. And the funny thing is, just as with the Miles 60s records on Columbia, which are easier to find than the Miles 50s records on Prestige, none of these go for crazy amounts of money, but it is harder to find the 50s records in good shape. I think because the hi-fis weren't as good and they were digging into the records a little bit more, or the stylists weren't as refined as they slowly got through the 60s and 70s. But they're still, you can probably find them on Discogs for not crazy money. And to me, these are the bedrock of contemporary jazz performance, really. Miles, every decade of Miles, he's breaking ground. He's one of those few artists, like, to me, a Frank Zappa, a Frank Sinatra, like the Beatles, who kept reinventing himself and was always totally both reflecting the culture and leading the culture. He's just, I've interviewed many of the musicians I've worked with Miles over the years for different publications. I thought about it yesterday. I've interviewed Dave Liebman, Al Foster, Chick Corea, Lenny White, Billy Hart, who played with Miles in some degree, I think. And I'm not saying that to tout my thing, but each one of these guys, when I interviewed them, they have nothing but good things to say about Miles Davis. So the idea that Miles Davis was a con artist or a thief or was riding on people's coattails is just hogwash and bullshit. Miles is one of the great figures in jazz of the 20th century. Now, I'm a little tired of the constant whoring out of Miles, the pimping out of Miles to sell more records by Legacy when they're sitting on a lot of great music they haven't reissued at all, like so much of the Duke Ellington catalog. You cannot deny that Miles Davis is a brilliant musician, and not like Art Blakey, was able to focus and pull through some amazing talent. But Miles is more of a shapeshifter than Art. Art took their tunes from Wayne Shorter or Jimmy Merritt or Lee Morgan and played them pretty straight. Miles Davis music is much more ethereal, much more cosmic in a way, more cerebral. Even the 50s stuff with the Quintet. Art Blakey's music is always wham, bam, slam, which I love it for that. It grooves so hard. But as the 50s went into the 60s, consciousness, art, everything changed, and Miles was at the forefront of that movement, especially in jazz, and he reacted to what was happening around him. The 60s records, Nefertiti, Fall, Kilimanjaro, Miles Smiles, Miles in the Sky, ESP. You can hear the influence of what was going on in free music, from Ornette to Albert Ayler, especially on the Nefertiti record, and they're all reacting. Tony Williams was already always so far ahead of everyone, as you can hear on his early Blue Note records, but just that little bit, you got to give it up for Miles. As I noticed in my haphazard fashion, this comp joins together, I believe, Cookin and Steamin. No, Cookin and Relaxin. I don't have a first pressing or early pressing of Relaxin. I used to have an Analog Productions copy of it. It was okay. It was nothing compared to the original pressings. But this is Cookin and Relaxin, so we've sort of covered that. We did Relaxin, right? Now we go on to Workin with the Miles Davis Quintet. And the track I used was Train's Blues, which is kind of a medium up-tempo swinger of blues. And where you hear them bantering a little bit in the beginning. My original pressing has a lot of projection. It's very warm, has a big sound stage, very popping, jabbing horn figures. The horn is up front, the trumpet is up front. The bass is very warm and big. The whole recording is very rich, dynamic, earthy, very broad, deep stage. Train sound is very tart. The whole thing is very alive. And you can really hear the space on Workin. You can hear the studio space even more than you can hear it on Relaxin. And I'm just curious to see what they say here. So I guess all these are recorded at Hackensack, because they're all like just 5 days apart. The Cookin, Steamin, Workin, Relaxin. So on this one, Train's Blues off of the compilation I wrote down. More treble detail, as I was saying. These are unplayed promos, so the top end is really clean. Very good drums. A little less depth overall than the original. Very excellent cymbal ping and body space. Trumpet is very up front. It's less rich than the original pressing. The top end is very clear, as I was saying. Bass is reasonably deep. Has the same imaging. The placement, obviously, because it's not a remix, it's exactly the same. And the size was almost the same overall. Very clean. A little less weight overall than the original. The original pressings are just very big sounding. You can really hear the space. And this comp, both these comps are pretty similar. They're just not as big. Train has the same space, big mono spot, but overall a little less weight, a little less scale. In general, but still the top end's very clear and very good. And then I played from Steamin, Salt Peanuts, Salt Peanut, Salt Peanut, in which I wrote a lot of space, tons of slam, excellent imaging, very wide mono spot, a lot of depth. The drums are up front because there's a wonderful Philly Joe Jones solo in this, showing off all his snare drum chops. So he's up front right away. Pinpoint imaging, smooth piano, lots of depth and horn depth. You can really hear the reverb off the walls no matter who's playing. Train is very up front. There's a lot of attack by everyone in this recording. Lots of room sound, big drums, and as I said, it's a really long solo which starts out around the kit, then focuses on the snare drum. And Philly Joe Jones is such a master, and he's very gregarious in the way he plays, and very rudimental in the way he plays. That's what attracted to me him at the beginning. He plays all this beautiful rudimental stuff. I was I was a drum corps drummer, and I studied with two guys who taught at Berkeley, and I studied with one guy who was a Scottish rudimental teacher, and the Scottish rudiments are much more complex and detailed than the 26 American rudiments the snare drumming is based on. And it is interesting that I think that is becoming less. When I was growing up, there was a repertoire that you studied. Morris Goldenberg for classical, Anthony Cerrone on the snare drum, as well as Ted Reed Syncopation, the Jim Chapin Independence books, George Lawrence Stone Stick Control. But from what I've seen, all those books aren't quite as important as they were, which maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I'm not sure. Back to his amazing solo, which ends with a lot of amazing cymbal crashes. You know, Philly's performance really pressurizes the room on Salt Peanuts. So on the comp of Salt Peanuts, which is on here, I wrote thinner, smaller, less dynamic, less immediate. That sounds like a reissue. But all in all things taken into consideration, both of these reissues, which are cut out, which I paid 15 bucks for, were really, really fantastic. I don't believe I have any analog productions, because they've done all these, and I think someone said recently they just announced they're going to repress the analog productions. But if I was you, before I spent money on those, if you're concerned about sound, in my feeling, closer to the source is always better. And these shocked me. You know, just like an OJC can sound really fantastic because it's cut like within 10 years of the original. Less deterioration, maybe some of the same stamping, because there aren't that many stampers or presses around the world. And I generally I've always known OJCs are really good, but this shocked me how generally overall great these sound. They're a little lighter weight overall, but the imaging's the same, the attack is the same, they're very open sounding, and on a couple instances, the drums were much more up front. I think on Relaxin, which really kind of surprised me. So as I said, you can find these on Discogs for not too much money. Miles Davis Workin and Steamin, and this one is just Miles Davis. Why they didn't call this one Cookin' and Relaxin, who knows? But they're both from 1974, and I highly recommend you searching these out. Thanks again for watching the channel.